A prince's chief envoy grabbed the royal guard's arm to force a bow. He did not bend. I have run state events at the House of Kirkwell for 22 years, and I have never once seen a man try to physically move a royal guard out of a photograph. Until that Thursday evening, on the third step of the grand staircase, 40 minutes before the king was due to appear. My name is Percival Vane. I am the master of ceremonies for the House of Kirkwell, which means that for one night a year, the treaty renewal banquet, when the reigning house hosts the delegation of whichever nation has come to sign its long friendship into another decade. I am the man who makes sure 400 moving parts arrive at the same instant looking like they were never moving at all. I stand at the base of the staircase with a clipboard I never look at, because if I have to look at it, something has already gone wrong. That night something went wrong in front of me in slow motion, and I watched a man learn badly, publicly, and far too late that some things in this house are not decoration. The guard on the third step was Corporal Ellis Marrow, 26 years old, 4 years in the ceremonial company, and by then 2 years standing that exact post on treaty nights, the fixed mark we call it, the single motionless point at the base of the grand staircase where the king's own entrance is timed. Every other man in the receiving hall moves. The guard on the fixed mark does not. His stillness is not tradition for tradition's sake. It is a cue. The moment his heels lock at the base of that step, the orchestra leader in the gallery above starts his count. The doors at the top of the staircase are given their opening signal, and the king's own walking pace is set to arrive at the final step exactly as the last chord lands. Everyone in that hall who has done this more than once knows the guard is a metronome wearing a bearskin. I knew it. The footmen knew it. The visiting delegation's own household staff, who had rehearsed this with us twice that afternoon, knew it. Chief Envoy Dalibor Kresh did not know it, and worse, he did not think it was his business to ask. He came from the Free State of Ostrand, principal aide and chief of protocol to their young crown prince, and he had spent the 4 days of the state visit doing exactly what his title suggested, controlling every frame his prince appeared in. I dealt with protocol chiefs before. Most of them are exacting, a little vain, occasionally exhausting, and ultimately professionals who understand that a state house runs on rules older than their employer's family tree. Kresh was different. Kresh treated every rule that wasn't his own as an obstacle. He had already, over those 4 days, tried to move a cathedral procession up 11 minutes because his prince disliked waiting, tried to seat his own security ahead of the king's household cavalry at a garden reception, and been told no, calmly, each time, by people whose calm he clearly mistook for weakness rather than what it actually was, certainty. I'd watched him at the afternoon rehearsal too, 2 hours before any of this, and it should have told me what was coming. He'd stood at the top of the grand staircase timing the king's household stand-ins with his own wristwatch. Instead of trusting the cue sheet the orchestra leader had built over 3 decades of these evenings. He'd asked twice whether the soldier decoration at the base of the stairs was really necessary for the rehearsal, and been told twice by my own deputy that Marrow's mark was the single fixed point the whole sequence hung from. Kresh had nodded both times in the way people nod when they've already decided not to believe you. I noted it in my log and thought no more of it. I did not yet understand that Kresh was not most protocol officers. That evening he came down the side corridor at a half-run, his tie already loosened, a folded schedule crushed in one fist, 40 minutes before doors, and he found me at the base of the staircase. "Your photographer is in the wrong position," he said, without greeting. "I need the angle from the third step. That is where the light is. That is where my prince will be photographed shaking your king's hand, and there is a soldier standing directly in the frame." "That soldier is the fixed mark chief envoy," I said. "His position doesn't move, the photographer will." "Then move the soldier." "I can't do that." "You are the master of ceremonies. You can do anything you like." I explained it to him as I have explained it 100 times before, that Marrow's post was the timing anchor for the king's entrance, coordinated with the orchestra and door staff down to the second, and that if the guard moved even a stride, the whole sequence would drift out of alignment in front of 400 guests and his own prince. Kresh listened to perhaps half that sentence before he stopped listening at all. His eyes went past me up the 3 steps, to where Marrow stood exactly where he had stood for 2 hours already, chin level, eyes forward, white-gloved hands crossed over the rifle sling, immaculate and utterly unbothered by the man arguing about him 6 feet away. "He's a prop," Kresh said. "I've watched him. He hasn't moved in an hour. He can stand somewhere else." And before I could put a hand up, before I could say his name, Kresh went up the 3 steps himself. I want to be precise about what happened next, because I told this story to the regimental board 3 days later, and precision mattered to them as much as it matters to me now. Kresh did not ask Mero to move. He reached out, took hold of Mero's upper arm, the left one above the elbow over the red wool, and pulled, the way you'd pull a coat rack that was blocking a doorway. Not a shove. A grab with real intention behind it, meant to physically relocate a man in uniform 3 feet to his left so a camera angle would look better. Mero did not move. I don't mean he resisted. I mean his arm did not bend, his stance did not shift, his weight did not so much as rock onto the back foot. 26 years old and built like the doorframe of an old church, he simply continued standing exactly where he had been standing, as if Kresh's hand weighed nothing at all, which, against 4 years of drill discipline and a body trained to hold a firing stance under far worse provocation than an Envoy's grip, it might as well not have. Kresh pulled a second time, harder, his knuckles whitening on the wool, and I watched something close to panic cross his face when the arm still would not give, the particular panic of a man discovering, in front of witnesses, that the thing he assumed was furniture was in fact immovable by design. I gave you an instruction, Kresh said louder now, aware that heads were turning along the hall. Footmen, 2 of the delegation's own aides, a junior officer of our household cavalry posted at the east door. Step aside. Mero's eyes did not drop to him. They stayed level forward, fixed on the middle distance the way regulation demands. But his voice, when it came, was calm and carried clean across the marble. Sir, I can't leave this mark. It's the king's timing cue. If I move, his entrance moves with me and the orchestra with it. I don't care about your orchestra. I care about my prince's photograph. Then I'd ask you to let go of my arm, sir. He said it the way you'd tell someone their shoelace was untied, without heat, without a flicker of insult taken, a plain statement of fact offered once. Kresh did not let go. He tightened his grip instead and made the mistake, I think, of believing that persistence would eventually produce movement where force had not. He set his feet to pull a third time harder, and that was the moment the junior cavalry officer at the east door started walking fast. That officer's part mattered, even though he never laid a hand on anyone. His name was Lieutenant Aldrich Fenn, 23, 6 weeks into his first state posting, and by his own account he had already covered half the distance to the staircase, hand not yet on his sidearm but close enough that 2 of the delegation's own aides stepped out of his path before he needed to do anything at all. He told me later it wasn't the grabbing that moved him. Soldiers get grabbed at by frightened civilians more often than the public imagines, and there are calm ways of handling that which don't involve running. It was Mero's voice. He sounded like he was reading off a duty roster, Fenn said. Not scared, not angry. That's when I thought someone needs to be there in case this fellow doesn't stop. I stepped onto the first stair myself at nearly the same moment, and neither of us needed to reach him first. The doors at the top of the grand staircase opened 4 minutes early. Not by accident. I learned afterward that the Prince of Ostrand himself, waiting in the antechamber above with our king, had glanced down through the gallery rail at the exact moment his own chief envoy laid a second hand on a royal guard's arm in full view of the receiving hall, and said something short to the king, and then walked to the top of the stairs alone, ahead of schedule, ahead of his own delegation, ahead of the orchestra's count. The music was not ready, the light was not set. None of it mattered next to what the prince did, which was descend 3 steps at a pace nobody had rehearsed, stop directly above his own envoy, and say, in a voice pitched to carry exactly as far as Kresh's had, "Let go of him." Kresh let go so fast his hand actually struck his own hip on the way down. "Your Highness, I was only trying to secure a clean angle for the..." "I watched you put your hands on a man standing his post in someone else's house." The prince's voice did not rise, but it did not need to. The hall had gone the particular kind of silent that only happens when 400 people simultaneously decide not to breathe. "In my country, Daliber, you would not lay a hand on one of my own household guard for a photograph. You do not do it here because it is not your house to rearrange. Apologize to him." I watched Kresh's face work through several things in quick succession: disbelief, calculation, the dawning arithmetic of a man realizing his career had just narrowed considerably in front of witnesses who would talk about it for years, before he turned stiffly to Mero, who had not moved a single inch through any of it, and offered a clipped, "My apologies, Corporal," that landed with all the warmth of a slammed drawer. "Accepted, sir," Mero said, eyes still forward, voice still even, as though the previous 90 seconds had happened to someone else entirely. The prince did not stop there. He turned to me next, and to the senior steward of our own household who had by then arrived at my shoulder and said, with the particular formality of a man making sure a thing was recorded, "I'd like it noted that Chief Envoy Kresh acted without my authorization and against my expressed wishes for this visit. He will not be representing me at tomorrow's signing." Then to Kresh directly, "You'll return to the delegation's quarters. We'll discuss your position when we're home." Kresh did not argue. There was, by that point, nothing left to argue with, not the guard, who had never given him a single inch to push against, and not his own prince, who had just removed him from the room in front of the very cameras he'd tried to rearrange a soldier for. He walked back down the corridor he'd come running down 40 minutes earlier, and I never saw him at another Kirkwell function again. The doors closed. The orchestra leader, bless him, recovered his count in under a minute, and when the king descended the grand staircase 11 minutes later, on schedule precisely as rehearsed, past a guard standing exactly where he had stood the entire time, arm faintly reddened under the wool where a man's grip had been, and would leave a bruised marrow never once mentioned to anyone, nobody in that hall watching the ceremony unfold would have guessed that 40 minutes earlier someone had tried to drag the whole evening's timing off its axis by the sleeve. There was a formal side to it too, which I only learned about afterward, since such matters aren't usually brought to a civilian master of ceremonies. Marrow's commanding officer, a major named Corwin Reese, requested the incident be logged and reviewed the following morning, not because he doubted Marrow had done right, but because any hand laid on a guard on post is treated as a matter of record regardless of who apologizes for it. 3 witnesses gave statements: myself, Lieutenant Fenn, and one of the delegation's own aides, a young woman named Ilsa Van, who told the board unprompted that she had warned Kresh privately at rehearsal that the household doesn't move its guards for anyone. The board's finding took under 10 minutes. No fault to Corporal Marrow, a formal note commending his restraint, and a quietly worded letter through diplomatic channels confirming what the prince had already said aloud on the stairs. I spoke to Marrow properly for the first time 2 days later, in the corridor outside the guardroom, mostly because I wanted to apologize for not reaching the stairs before the prince did. He waved it off, the way soldiers of that particular temperament wave off anything that might resemble praise. "I wasn't going to move, sir," he said. "Not because I was told not to, because if I move the king's entrance is wrong, the music's wrong, and 400 people notice something's off even if they can't say what. My arm doesn't matter, the mark does." I asked him whether it had hurt, the grip, the second pull especially, which I'd seen from 6 feet away and which had looked, frankly, vicious. "A bit," he admitted, "didn't seem the moment to say so. That, I have come to think, over 22 years of watching this house receive the powerful, the anxious, the well-meaning, and the occasional man who mistakes stillness for permission, is the whole of it." Chief Envoy Kresh looked at a guard who hadn't moved in an hour and concluded he was decoration, a piece of the room he was entitled to rearrange for a better photograph. He was wrong in a way that cost him his post by the following spring. I heard, second-hand, that the Austrian delegation quietly replaced him before the year was out, and that his own prince never fully trusted his judgment again after watching him lay hands on a stranger's soldier for the sake of a camera angle. Marrow, for his part, was back on the fixed mark 8 months later for the following year's treaty renewal, arm long since healed, standing exactly where a king's entrance needed him to stand, immovable for reasons that had nothing to do with stubbornness, and everything to do with what he was actually holding up. The delegation that year sent a different chief of protocol, an older, quieter man who arrived a full day early to walk the sequence with my deputy and asked, before anything else, which points in the house were not to be touched. I introduced him to Marrow myself at the base of the same staircase, and watched the 2 of them shake hands like men who understood each other without needing the story explained. I heard much later and second-hand that Kresh had gone on to a lesser posting within the Austrian Foreign Service, trade documentation, far from cameras and staircases and princes who might watch him make the same mistake twice. I can't confirm every particular of that, and it isn't really my business to. What I do know, because I watched it happen from 6 feet away, is that a man came into this house believing a soldier standing still for an hour was standing still because there was nothing better for him to do, and left it having learned, in front of 400 witnesses and his own prince, that stillness in this house is never idle. It is always holding something up. I've since made it a point, at the start of every briefing with a new delegation's protocol staff, to say one sentence before anything else, and I said it to Kresh's replacement myself. The guards on the fixed marks are not part of the scenery. They are the clock this house keeps its time by. Touch the clock and you don't get a better photograph. You get the whole evening running late, and if you are especially unlucky, a prince who saw exactly what you did.